Well, hello everyone. Good evening on this beautiful Tuesday evening, at least out here in northern Idaho. And it's a great joy to be with you once again on our Fulton Sheen Institute live, our webcasts. Hopefully you've been enjoying with Mark Mallett and then Christine Watkins and on her book that's just kind of been shaking people up literally around the world called The Warning. I encourage you to go back and to watch those when you get a chance. And also before we begin, I really want to encourage you to, because I always forget this, is to subscribe to this channel, this YouTube channel. You'll see it just to the right of, I can hear somebody in the background. Maybe Mike can mute himself for just a second. Thanks. And so you'll see this to the right just of your window there, YouTube window, to subscribe. The benefits of that are two. One, obviously, it's great for us. It gets more of what we're trying to do out there. But secondly, though, you'll always know when we have a YouTube live that pops on, a new video, whether it's live or it's pre-recorded. You'll always know when it's going to go on there. Another thing is I encourage you right now to like this video, because this is another way that this gets out there. The more of these things are liked, the more they'll be in search engines. And the feedback that I've had so far from our previous two webcasts has been phenomenal. People tuning in from all around the world, either live or they're catching the replay. So I want to encourage you to do that as well. And also, before I forget, because my wife is always on me, because she'll watch these sometimes with me live in the background somewhere. She'll be like, you forgot to mention this, you forgot to mention that, is check out the Fulton Sheen Institute website. There's always little updates, especially in the blog section. There's been an explosion of interest in the blogs that I've been putting out recently, especially with all the cultural things, the things that we're up against, the Black Lives Matters, those kinds of subjects, to the point where I actually got censored. I got blocked trying to send one out. And I wasn't too happy about that, since I'm paying for this service to get it out there. And all I was doing was exposing what that movement really stands for, and how we need to, we need to know what's going on before blindly, subscribing to slogans and those kinds of things. So check out the blog post, especially the last one that I did for the July 4th. Great feedback on that one. And it was what the United States needs now is a declaration of dependence. And I go into some nice history points there, but I focus on like what's at the heart right now, this critical moment of history for our country, which is going to be a big subject tonight with our special guest, Dr. Michel Therrien. So I think I covered what I needed to as an introduction, and given enough people time to be tuning in as they roll in throughout. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our guest. Here we go. Dr. Michel Therrien. I have to read his bio. I always forget all the things that he's done on there. Michel is a friend of mine, and so that's for me, that's the best part of all of this. But he does have an impressive background, and I'd like to share that with you. So Dr. Michel Therrien, he is the president and the CEO of the Preambula Group, and he'll explain what that means and what the word preambula means. That's probably the first thing. It's not to the preambula to the Constitution or anything like that. Prior to founding the Preambula Group, he served as the president of the Institute for Pastoral Leadership and the director of evangelization for the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Before moving to Pittsburgh in 2014, he was a professor of moral theology and academic dean at the Augustine Institute in Denver. So many of you are familiar with the Augustine Institute and the tremendous programs that they're putting out. I'd highly recommend, as a parentheses, check out The Search. I think it's one of the best Catholic programs I've seen produced. Let's see. He taught for 7 years at St. Vincent Seminary in Latrobe, PA, and served as academic dean from 2008 to 2012. We'll skip the undergraduate stuff because he's got some impressive degrees. He went to Steubenville, so he's a fellow alumnus like myself. But then he went off and he studied In Gaming, Austria, received a licentiate degree in sacred theology from the International Theological Institute. And then he went and he got his doctorate in fundamental moral theology from the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. And I think more importantly for Dr. Therrien is that he has a book that was recently published this year, 2020, and it's the Catholic Faith Explained. I'm actually going to put that on the screen now that we're back on here. There it is, right smack in the middle. See that? It's got St. Peter, the statue of St. Peter from St. Peter's in Rome. So, very credentialed man, but more importantly, he's a good man. I've been blessed to know him for, I don't even know how long it's been, 8 years? I don't know. When we were in Colorado, when he was at the Augustine Institute, a mutual friend of ours, Father Nathan from the community of St. John, said, you've got to connect. And it was one of my best introductions because he's become a really good friend. Our families have become friends. And I also found someone who gets it. You know, Michel has a great, I think, and a penetrating insight into our culture, what's going on in the church, what's going on in the world, and then sifting through all the noise, what are the things that Catholics should have, I would say, foremost on their personal radar, spiritually, intellectually, culturally. And so that's why it was a blessing when he said that he would make the time out of his busy schedule to spend some time with us. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Michel Therrien, and I guess that's about it. Welcome.
Thanks, Peter.
Great.
Good to be here.
Good.
You're making me crack up here, though. You're giving the French pronunciation of my name.
Well, okay. We call him Mike, personally.
Yeah.
And I call him Monsieur Michel. I got lots of names, but so whatever your preference is. Michel, let us know.
Yeah, I have been called Michel by some of my professors, yes, for sure. But, Michael.
Okay, Mike, we'll do Michael. How's that?
Yeah.
All right.
That's good.
And before I go on too, Michael can't see this, but if you're watching it on the YouTube channel, there's the comment section. I encourage you to do two things. Just chime in, tell us where you're tuning in from. It's always good to know where people are. I mean, I get impressed when I see somebody chiming in from the Philippines or across the world. Who knows what time it is in these places? A number of people I've seen coming in from Canada. I saw somebody visiting the site about 10 minutes before we started from Edmonton. So I went back to my Edmonton Oilers days. And just for those of you who are hockey fans, this is not the same Michel Therrien who was the assistant coach of the Philadelphia Flyers and he played NHL stuff earlier on. Just to clarify, but please don't leave. Don't leave with that revelation. No.
Yeah.
So
you wouldn't be the first to make that mistake. Never tell you about the collection agency that came after me, Peter. when Therrien left coaching the Penguins.
That's right.
Called me up. Like, this is a physical therapy clinic down the South Hills. Are you Michael Therrien? I think he got the wrong guy.
He's like, yeah, I bet I did.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, it is such a joy to have him on. And from time to time, I might just point out where people are joining us from. We have already Ontario, Canada is with us tonight. Of course, we have Florida, San Diego, Texas, New England, another Ontario. Alejandra, welcome in Ecuador, Chicago, Yorktown, VA. So it's great to have Michael on. Michael, before I get into some of the heart of the matter, because what I want to focus on tonight is how I've been kind of labeling this interview, is how do Catholics rebuild civilization? Not build up, not how do we save civilization? How do we rebuild it? And my premise has been, and I've taken it from John Paul II and Fulton Sheen, is that we are, as they have said, at the end of an era. It's dying. It's going to die, and it is dying. And there's something more to come. And after we get through the pain and tribulation and purification that needs to take place, the church is always, just like when Rome fell in the Dark Ages as the world saw it began, the church was the only light. And so I want to focus on this transitional period, how you see it and all that. But I think there's something, what has drawn me to you and our friendship was in the beginning was your conversion story. Now, obviously, this is not like an interview on the whole conversion story, but I think it's important for our viewers to understand where you've come from, because they say, oh, he's got all these Roman degrees. Oh, Dr. Howard has all these Roman degrees and, blah, blah, blah. But what matters is that we have our past, and more than anything, that forms the kind of Catholic we are today. Because I always remind people, knowledge is great and knowledge informs what we love, but Lucifer knows more than we do, and that doesn't matter. It's who we are, in our actions. So, give us a little bit of a background of how you got to where you are today, outside of the nuts and bolts of what I described.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, I think family out of Seattle, but grew up in the 70s and 80s, and so Catholic education was maybe a little on the rocks in those years. And very experimental, trying new things that I think in hindsight didn't really work out. But the truth is I had a strong faith in God, in the sense that I had a strong sense of connection to God and relationship to God. I just wasn't well formed or well catechized, so I didn't know my faith very well, and so but I was a pretty prayerful kid, and that continued all the way through high school. I went off to college. I studied at Gonzaga, and I was very open, very passionate about theology. But I got a good, thorough Jesuit education, and which overall was good. It taught me how to think, how to reason, right. I learned a lot of very important things. I just didn't actually learn the Catholic faith in my theology degree there, and so I became a pretty strong advocate of liberation theology. I was, sort of a card-carrying Marxist, and visited base Christian communities during my junior year. I led Pax Christi and Amnesty International on campus for a couple of years, and so I was just really sort of, passionately into that. I also wasn't living my life morally in a very consistent way with the faith of my upbringing. So I graduated from college, and sort of I guess you could say, the floor of my life and existence came out from underneath me, and I fell into a pretty profound depression. And I was kind of in that nihilist sort of, is there any meaning and purpose to life? And like if you follow the logical trajectory of a lot of modern and postmodern philosophy and theological thinking, it really leads to a truly dead end. I mean, it just destroys your soul, actually. I never lost sight of God. I never stopped, sort of communicating with God through my prayer life, but I was utterly lost. And so anyway, thanks to various interventions of people in my life, I started getting I started undergoing a conversion experience back in 1993, and I would say that it was first, one of the things I learned religion, other things. Can you hear me, Peter? Because you froze there for a while. Is everything coming through?
We had a little bit of a garble the last 15 seconds or so.
Okay, right. Maybe
there's always something in this live stuff.
There's some things I suppose the Lord doesn't want to hear again.
You were saying something like the most important part of my conversion was, and then it blacked out.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. So yeah, I through the intervention of some people, I started, back in 93, 94, I started having a conversion. It was first intellectual, and I was joking that the first part of my conversion was believing that Jesus actually rose from the dead, that the Blessed Mother was truly a virgin, that the Catholic Church was really the church Christ founded, etc. So I sort of had an intellectual conversion, then a moral conversion that sort of followed that, and then it was in '96 that I ended up in a Franciscan. And ironically, I ended up there just on a pure act of faith. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about the school, and I told the Lord in prayer, just like I don't know to go to school. I want to go on to graduate school and I want to pursue, the doctorate, but I really don't know where to go to get the kind of foundation I need, and so I just told him, I said, just put something in my life to tell me where I should go to school, and I will. I'll go there. I'll just blindly fill out the application and I'll show up. So I met someone who said, yeah, you should go to Franciscan University. And if I can tell a funny story, when I was at Gonzaga, I was in a real debate and argument with a fellow classmate of mine, and we were really heated. And he looked at me and he goes, don't you believe the Catholic Church is a true Church of Christ? And I remember I said, absolutely not. Like, absolutely not. It's just a church, and complete blasphemy. And he said, there's this university in the Midwest where students go to mass every single day, and they go to confession on a regular basis, and they pray the rosary and all that stuff. And I remember saying to myself under my breath, I will never be caught dead on that campus. And so there I was at Franciscan University in my first week in class, and I suddenly had this strange memory of my saying that to this kid. And I was like, oh no, God has such a sense of humor. So here I am. And I was in a Scott Hahn class of all classes. I never heard of him. I didn't know anything about the place. I literally did fill out the application, got in my car, after being accepted, of course, got my car and just drove there and showed up. So that's like the nutshell version of my conversion.
Wow.
So.
Well, like I was saying earlier, I was always impressed just meeting you in the sense of, I think one of your gifts is the ability to articulate clearly for. You've done so much teaching in your life, and it's very evident when you're evangelizing. But I think that's one of the things that we need most today is to be able to translate that, the truth of what we're experiencing in life in a language that is teaching people what they need to know about, especially with your background in moral theology and forming culture, but in a way that just resonates with them versus it just stays in this academic sphere that I personally, I guess on one level it's intellectually stimulating, but I find in the times in which we live, I don't even care. It's like, if we can't reach people now and we look at the people we're trying to reach, it's like, what's the point? It's sort of like, I was talking to my wife today, Chantal, saying how do you reason with a culture today that is, they're so off the charts. They're so ignorant and blindly following things. And I was thinking about St. Dominic in the 13th century, how he founded the order of preachers, and he was, nothing he did could convert the heretics at that time, the Albigensians. And, they weren't just, against have issues with the faith. They were also very militant against the church too. And anyway, and then it was like Our Lady's eventually, with the whole story, she appears, preach the rosary. And I was like, maybe we we need to start going back to those kinds of things, because if we need power behind what we're doing. Anyway, that just struck me. And also, before I move on, fast forward then to today, because here we are in 2020, and you've just issued a book. Like I said, it should be on everybody's screen here. The Catholic Faith Explained. What led you to write that at this moment? People might say, well, there's a lot of things. Why not just pick up a catechism? Why not? There's a lot of things out there. Why this one?
Yeah. Well, without getting too much into the backstory, Sophia, I do a lot of work with Sophia Institute for teachers. And so they had commissioned me for a project, and I wrote a series of essays. And, one thing led to another. And eventually I just said, hey, can we turn these essays into a book? And when I was writing the essays originally for them, I just feel like we needed to approach the faith from more global perspective, in the sense of, what is Christianity really proposing to the world? Because I don't think most people have any clue what Christianity is really proposing to the world. And that's not just non-believers and unchurched people. I think a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics, can't really fully articulate that. And I don't mean that judgmentally. It's just that in all the experience I've had teaching and presenting at parish for example, and I've done, a lot of those presentations. I hear it again and again and again. I just don't think I've ever heard that before. Like no one's ever explained that. And I always say to them, I'm not 100% sure this is true, but I say it anyway. I think you probably have heard it. Someone's probably taught you what I just said to you, but I don't think you've ever seen the big picture. Like, I don't think you know how the little pieces of the faith fit together into a coherent view of reality in the world. And so every introduction to the faith that I ever, in my opinion, starts way down the road, is sort of be like people who've spent the last Catholicism. Mm-hmm. But it's like there needs to be a book that tries to start at the very, very beginning with some of the most basic concepts. The other thing that I really kept in mind in writing it is that at first I wanted to use very simple and accessible language, but I also wanted it to be meaty and substance. So I find a lot of stuff that's popular and accessible it's just too thin. It doesn't get into the meat enough. It's so practical that, again, you don't see the big picture. But on the other hand, a lot of theological work that are substantive are hard to read. Like the average person can't get their head around the language or just the vocabulary that's oftentimes used in books. So, so I wanted to write something that was accessible but meaty and substantive. And then also I'm a Thomist by training. And so I learned a lot about pedagogy from Aquinas, and I wanted to follow Aquinas' pedagogy. And you don't explain things that are difficult to understand in terms of things that are even more difficult to understand. And Catholics oftentimes do that. So you have to explain things that are difficult to understand in terms of things that people do understand. And this is, Jesus is a great teacher. So he always starts with things that are close and near to us in our experience, and then uses that by way of analogy or metaphor to try to help explain things that are much more mysterious and sublime and difficult to grasp. So in the book, I tried to follow and be true to that kind of a method. So I start out in the first chapter is talking about friendship and trust. What are these things? And why do we need them in our life? And why do we rely so much on trust in our life? And then from there, I move on to how do we know things? What is knowledge? What is truth? Because a lot of people, even Catholics, well-meaning apologists, don't even define truth correctly. Mm-hmm. They describe it as a thing out there, and so we argue about the thing out there. And it's like, truth is a correspondence, a relationship between the mind and reality. And we have to understand some basic things about how we come to know reality. And then I just build the case one piece at a time. It's like 21 short chapters. And last thing I'll say is just that, I find too, a lot of Catholics, especially parents, whose kids have stopped practicing the faith, and they want to do something for their child to help them understand the faith, but they don't know what to do. And so I kind of wrote the book to say, here, it's probably better that you don't try to have that conversation with your kids, because there might be a lot of resistance there, but maybe they would read a book that you could hand them, and then you could talk about it later. And maybe the book would do a lot of work and get a lot of mileage for you that you might not be able to do on your own, just because, some of the questions that people ask today are really hard. They're really tough. So I try to tackle all of those along the way, all those big questions.
Well, I think it's interesting that you're mentioning these things because, talking about how we're going to rebuild the civilization that's coming. And I say that like we're not 10 years out, 20. This is not how, at least I'm going to speak how I see it. I don't see this as 10 years out, 20 years out. I see this as 3 to 5 years out. Things are moving so fast now that, when I try to communicate these things with my children, my older ones especially, I want them to understand the times in which we're living in. And it's like week by week, I'm having to update them in things because I realize this is going to hit them head on very soon. And in some places, these kids are getting hit on with it where they are. I just saw a clip of a family from about a week ago in Troy, New York. Maybe you saw that. It was on Twitter. And it was a woman with 3 of her little kids, and she was holding a baby. And Black Lives Matter is sitting there outside this church, sitting there and screaming, "This is not God's house. How dare you do this?" The children weren't masked. And then it was saying, we're going to call CPS, and then they're like, save those kids, save those kids. And these little kids didn't know what was going on. All they're doing is walking into a church. And one of my kids came in and said, "What are you watching?" I said, "This just happened a week ago." And it's like things are, and I've mentioned this so many times, when it comes to historical eras, that things always quicken at the end. When Rome fell, like when it really began to fall, it fell fast. And if you've been to Rome and you look around and you see the ruins, and then you get an idea of what was there, you wonder how in the world did a thing like this fall? And today, in a sort of a non-reflective culture, people are just always, they're only in the moment and they can't go beyond that on their phones and everything else while all of this is happening. And that's kind of what I wanted to, building off of what your book is about, is like, these are fundamental things that have to be part of what we're going to do moving forward. What is truth? The basic things, that then inform, the morality of a culture. So, Michael, when it comes to these times, how would you describe this very moment in history when you wake up and you look at how you're going to use God has given you? What do you see?
Yeah, gosh, when you were telling me what you wanted to talk about, I was like, man, I don't even know where you first bite into it. It's such a huge topic. For me, it's a huge topic because studying the genealogy of our times, like going back and present moment, it's a very important question for us, and it's a question that requires us to go way back in time. I think a lot of times we think, everything was great, and then the 1960s happened, and then everything just kind of went to hell in a handbasket all overnight. And I'm thoroughly unconvinced of that. I think that things well underway long before, hundreds of years before 1960s hit. I think that was sort of really the collapse of Western civilization. That was really kind of the end point, in my opinion. We live in a time in which people are trying to remake the foundations of a civilization fundamentally on the premise of liberalism and a kind of progressivism that looks very socialist and sort of secular and pretty radicalized in that sense. Very recently I've been trying to think about, well, like, how do I understand this? And I think what I would say right now is that the world faces, or I would say Christians in general, Christians around the world, not just Catholics, but all Christians, we face a choice, right? And that choice is do we stand up united as a people across, every conceivable boundary there is in the world right now? And do we insist and demand that society accepts nothing less than the gospel? And particularly Jesus' teaching about the least among us. Because I think what's happened is that Christians have had lots of opportunities over the last 5 or 6, 7 centuries to really stand with the littlest. And I don't think we've always done that so well. And so what I think has happened is that there's a parody of the gospel. There's a parody of the kingdom that Satan has created. And it's socialism, it's progressivism, it's liberalism, it's secularism. It's these ideologies, which are all kind of one thing, but depending on what aspect of it you're talking about, it has a different name, So if you talk about secularism, we're talking about the separation of kind of like religion from public life and the privatization of religious and spiritual experience. If you're talking about socialism, you're talking about a certain, socioeconomic configuration about how we should do things economically and politically. You're talking about liberalism, you're talking about, the absolutization of choice and human freedom, and that, any limit on one's choice is a complete affront to their dignity, except for those who happen to disagree with that premise. So, these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with today. And so I think that as Christians, we're 1 billion strong. We're not all strong among those billions. That billion, whatever the actual number is, but it's pretty close to that. But if we were really united in our effort to bear witness to the gospel in all of its integrity, by the way we lived our lives, by the way we transformed the little spheres of culture and influence around us, we could turn the story around very quickly. I really believe that. But that's difficult because I think that we buy into, we compromise with the culture in many, many ways. And that's whether we're on the left or the right side of the political spectrum. I think that we accommodate ourselves to a lot of the currents and trends that are going on in the culture, we don't really live our lives as disciples to the degree to which I think Jesus is calling us to do so right now. So the choice before us is that we kind of lay down and allow sort of a parody of the kingdom, a parody of the gospel that's crying the battle cry of justice and equality and freedom and, reparation and all these kind of Christian concepts and terms. But in infusing those concepts and terms with something that's completely of the spirit of Antichrist and totally opposed to the gospel, because it doesn't look anything like what Jesus was all about. It at all. It doesn't look like anything like what the saints have created over the ages in terms of communion, community, justice, a radical love for the poor and the marginalized and so on and so forth. So it's sort of like that's sort of a point of entry into a conversation that I think we should have. But it's like that. We're looking back at the collapse of a kind of decadence that we've seen. And it's a sellout because we substituted the real thing for other more worldly things that maybe kind of looked like they were of the same thing. So it's sort of like, let's try to build a Christian vision of society without Christ or the sacraments or the grace of God or the church. And that experiment is collapsing for me. And so the church, that is of God, we have to come together and we have to really and not take up the weapons of the enemy, right? I always tell people, look, David didn't slay Goliath's sword. He primarily defeated Goliath by his God. And he used the most unlikely instrument, which was a slingshot. And then after Goliath was dead, then he cut off his head with his sword. And it's like it's like we try to defeat the enemy oftentimes by using the enemy's weapons. And this is what I always say as Christians, the enemy is always going to use his weapons better than we do. So the only weapons we could use are the weapons that Christ gives us, which is, faith, hope, charity, the gifts of the Spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit operating in our lives. That's what's going to work. And so we have to lean into that in a very, very serious way. And I think that if we do, and we do that in a united way, I think we truly will become a leaven that will transform and renew civilization. Personally, I don't want to go back to the way it was before, because I think there are a lot of problems with the way things were. I don't want to rebuild the foundations of Western civilization. I want to renew and redeem the foundations of Western civilization according to the precepts of Jesus Christ and the gospel, the Sermon on the Mount. That's the vision of social existence and the world that God has. So.
Yeah, gosh, a number of things that you said stood out for me. When you were talking about the parody of how things are today, my mind goes right to the French Revolution and what was the three banners, liberty, equality, and fraternity, but without God. And what did each of those end up with? Liberty turned into being libertine, not doing whatever you ought, but whatever you want. And we know how that turned out. The 1960s, like you said, I think was the collapse of that. And then they wanted to do equality without God. Well, what does that turn into? It turns into Marxism. It opened the door for that. And there was no such thing as a brotherhood in Christ. It was, as Fulton Sheen would say, it became a comradeship in Antichrist. And the 20th century bears that out. And as Fulton Sheen mentioned, in a great book that I recommend every single Catholic read, anyone read, because it summarizes the entire social teaching of the church that's prophetic for this very moment, is read a book. It's Justice and Charity. And it's basically, it's taking conferences that Fulton Sheen put together. And that's what he did. He did the breakdown of civilization from the French Revolution with those banners. And then he ended with fraternity. And he said the French Revolution could never have done that, the French Revolution represents basically the spirit of our age. It's just doing all these things without God. And he said fraternity can only be answered by the church, because fraternity is based off of a common fatherhood. That we have, we share one father, and therefore we can see and treat each other as brothers. And then he says, and that's where and only charity can come in. And as you were saying, the weapons that we have of charity. And I find it interesting because that's when we're looking at what is going to be built. I think it's almost like the blueprint is in this work, justice and charity. So I recommend that you and everyone check it out. You mentioned
Yeah,
all.
like
Go ahead.
can I just really quick, I just want to, the irony. I think this is important to point out this irony that in the French Revolution, they wanted liberty, but they ended up with tyranny, right? They wanted equality, but they ended up with a worse class system, which is what precipitated socialism, because liberalism, that is the Republican form, French Republican form of that failed, right? And then, they wanted fraternity, and they ended up with the bloodiest, most boring, century and a half, you know. So to your point, that's the irony, is that when we seek those good and those legitimate ends without God and not according to God's ways, we end up with exactly the thing that we're trying to get rid of, even worse than we had it before. And that's what's going to happen with all this radical, sort of anarchist, revolutionary spirits in our streets today. They're going to make it 10 times worse than anything they ever complained about.
Yeah, and if you look at what the actual creed of these groups, like the Black Lives Matter, because this is all public. You can always tell people, go to their website. This is why my blog got censored. It was not allowed to be sent out. I could post it on my site, but they wouldn't let me email it. I thought that was interesting because it violated the terms of agreement. It's because all I did was copy and paste their principles. It has nothing to do with equality for black people. It was about, what does it say? The denuclearization of the family. It was to all moral relativistic principles. Gender ideology should be, wide open. They had to redefine the family. I mean, this is at the heart of Marxism when it comes down to it. And so, like I said, what are they bringing everywhere they go? They're not bringing peace. They're not opening minds. All they're doing is just causing tyranny, violence, and that's why I get a little nervous because I have kids. But we're kind of at that moment of the mobs and the masses are coming together. And this leads me to a point that you made, and I want you to comment on it, Michael, is you mentioned it was a hopeful statement that, Christians, Catholics especially, but Christians, all of us, we got to come together and be united. How do we counter, which in my opinion is definitely a plan of the devil, to keep us isolated, keep us from going to church? I mean, where the church is bowing down to the state in every single recommendation. It's going along, I'm talking about the leadership going along with the narrative, where the church has never done that. Even during the bubonic plague, the church lost a lot of great priests, but that's when they found out that they had saintly priests, that's when the church goes out. So how do we be united, and what do we do when everything right now and the leadership is not defending us enough or encouraging us enough to be united, to go to mass, to have those things that make us strong?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, I totally agree with you. I don't want to really get into my opinions about COVID-19 and the, I think rather absurd ways in which we're responding to this outbreak. I think it's more of a pandemonium than a pandemic, which has much more to do with the coming election year than it has to do with, a virus. But at any rate, I think the challenge is that, and again, I'm going to hit hard on this. Even when we could go to church, right? We were a consumer-based faith, right? Everybody goes to church to get what they want. That's not the church. The church needs to receive the Eucharist and go out. We need to go out. We need to be on mission in the world, going out and trying to transform the world for Christ. And I have to be honest, I don't think most Catholics are not doing that. They haven't been doing it. And what's interesting now is, in our grouping, we have one of the stronger parish groupings around in Pittsburgh, because I call it a grouping because we're in the process of consolidating parishes, and we're clustered right now, and then we're going to merge 4 parishes into one. Our grouping is one of the stronger groupings, and we only have 25% barely 25% of the 25% that were only coming to Mass before this hit. So it's like it's underwhelming, our level of engagement and commitment. to the mission of Jesus Christ in the world. And the only way that we're going to fix that problem, in my opinion, is that we have to really, do what Paul VI talked about, which is the church has to be evangelized before it can evangelize. Like our people have to really become disciples of Jesus Christ who are on fire for their faith and want to go out. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we're really proclaiming and preaching the gospel. And I think that what happens is that sometimes we fall into this more apologetic mode, or this more sort of doctrinaire mentality, where it's like we're parsing doctrinal distinctions as opposed to proclaiming Jesus Christ to people and bringing people into a relationship with him where they really become his disciples and follow him and go deeper interiorly in their spiritual life and really are set on fire like a St. Dominic. You mentioned St. Dominic. I mean, St. Dominic's, the man was he was like an inferno of the Holy Spirit. That's what pushed him out into the streets to preach. That we need our people. And then, of course, he had a huge following. I mean, it's not like it was just him. I mean, the Dominican order and the Franciscan order, both of those orders exploded. There were so many people that wanted to follow their leadership and follow that movement. That's what we need today. Like we need people that, want to go out there and not shout people down, but love people into conversion and do it the way Jesus modeled that for us. So, there's a lot of work to be done. I think the solution is simple. It's just not easy because we're in a deficit position where we're kind of digging out of a hole. And we need to transform and shift the paradigm of how we function and operate as a community of faith and as a people, so that we are more effective as we go out into the world to try to present a different view of things that has real possibility for eradicating real evils and really redeeming the culture that's so utterly lost and bereft of truth and goodness. It's just lost, utterly lost.
My wife, Chantal, and I were just talking this afternoon, and one of the things that came up, and I'd like to ask you, because you are your specialty is moral theology, as a moral theologian. What is the responsibility that we Catholics, the lay people especially, really the lay people, in an environment where it's the revolution of ideology, because revolution is really on the level of philosophy. War is something that's being played out. As it crosses over into a more violent culture, in your face, like, we're not going to let you do this. We're not, we're going to, it's no longer just the screaming back and forth. It's the violence, and the mobs are picking up. What response, or how should Catholics, or how can they respond to these things? Because some of the arguments I hear as well, just be prepared to be martyred. And I'm like, okay, I get that. But people also don't want to see innocence, violence against them. They don't want to see their rights go away. We fight for things in the world kind of in two levels. We always pray that it doesn't come out into a material war. But at what point is a just response in order to kind of gain back or to reclaim things? How do we find this balance? Or just tell us. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because that's a tough one. I live in a place, and where I live. Here, everybody's got, 3 AR-15s, their rifles, sidearms, they open carry. It's like, that's just their life. And they're like, yeah, you want to come over here, you step on my private property, and these things are going on. It's the last thing you're going to remember, And they'll say, but that's my right, And it's like, okay, you're going to go take this statue down? You're going to have to go through us. Not just maybe my rosary in my hand. If I see you go after it, that's erasing, this cancel culture. We're not going to let you do it. We're not just going to stand there and yell, and then when you push me, I'm just going to get out of the way. Like, what is a Catholic response to that? A Christian response to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, I would say, first of all, there's many responses. There's many things that we need to be about right now. I think first and foremost, we have to pray. We have to pray and make reparation, and we have to pray more. We just don't pray enough. I'm going to be honest, we don't. We don't pray with enough fervor. I'm not talking about probably the people listening to this show, right? You probably are. But like, what percentage of the people of God do the people who are watching this show make up? I hate to say it, but probably 95% of the people that belong to most parishes don't have any interest in listening to a show like this and following along. So we have to remember that. So the people of God need to lean into their faith much more deeply and pray and because we are, St. Paul says we're facing principalities and powers. So we're foolish if we think that we're going to go out there and again pick up Goliath's sword and be able to even pick the thing up. Like, if we're going to get out there and sort of throw the same tactics back at these people, the devil's going to have more rage than we'll ever come up with. It's just like it just doesn't work that way. And we see the problem because, first of all, as Jesus says, the children of the children of this world or this age are more clever than the children of light. We tend to be, we're very obedient. Tend to be very pliant, sort of go along with things and very trusting. And so, this is the problem. It's been repeated again and again in history. It's like, you sort of watch it. How did the Third Reich rise in Germany? Well, we're watching it right now because good people just did nothing. It'll be fine. It'll be okay. But we think, okay, so we have to take to the streets and we have to become protesters and we have to become, violent. Well, no, that's not really what Jesus modeled for us. We have to go out into the world and be the body of Christ. If a person has a choice between responding to a person who's showing them love and mercy versus facing off with a person who's screaming in their face and wagging their tongue in their, 9 people out of 10 are going to go with the person who shows love and mercy. But we're not showing up. That's the problem. Christians are not showing up out in the world. We're minding our own business, keeping to ourselves. Most people, living a kind of what I would call sort of a bourgeoisie life. And again, I'm not talking about the small percentage of people that are just as concerned as you and I are. I'm talking about, I just know you go to church and you look around, you're like, these people are not invested in what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. So I think that, and I don't say that to be judgmental. I'm not trying to be condemning. There's all sorts of reasons our people are in that place right now. And for the most part, it's not their fault. We haven't had good formation. We haven't had good preaching. We haven't had a lot of things that we needed along the way over the last 40 or 50 years. So I'm not really trying to blame or anything. I'm just trying to state a fact that if we're going to make a difference, we have to, as a people, there's so many of us. That's the truth. Like, I always think about like a neighborhood. Think about it like an urban setting where the neighborhood just goes down the tubes and you have these gangs that are just kind of controlling, these little drug lords. And ask yourself, like, what percentage of the people is that who live in that neighborhood? It's probably not even 1%. So if the other 99.9 just stood up and said, hey, we're not doing that, you're done, they would just go away. The problem is that the 90% in that neighborhood are afraid, and they don't come together as a united front to say, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to be violent. We're not going to take up our guns and go do drive-by shootings to try to end this. That's not the way. The way is we're going to stand united in solidarity in our humanity and in our dignity as children of God, like Martin Luther King did, for example, Dorothy Day, Mother Teresa. There's great heroes that have people who, and say, look, we're just not going to tolerate this nonsense. So, that's too like sort of simplistic or kind of like a Pollyannish answer, but that's the response that Christ gave us. That's how he faced off with the principalities and the powers. He proclaimed the kingdom of God. He performed the works of mercy. He preached. He brought people into covenant fellowship with himself, and he built a movement that within 3 centuries had 20 million followers. And I'm always scratching my head saying, well, I'm sure I can't come up with a better idea than that. I'm not going to do it more effectively than Jesus himself did. So, I think we have to be, become disciples or students of the Master again, study his ways and begin to implement them again in these times of ours. I don't know what else to say to that than that.
Sure. Well, I think that was a great answer. So let's just do a little scenario here. What would Christ be like, and how would he be doing this today when the state, the power of the state, Jesus wasn't working within, hey, you can't go somewhere unless you're whatever, socially distanced and all these other things that, like those things didn't quite exist like that on just the societal things. I mean, yes, there was a lot of control of things, but people were, he was able to kind of go anywhere. That's just to kind of surprise people. Today, in order to follow Christ, it's like you have to break these rules. Because if you don't, it's just you. I mean, the point is, this is how I see it with the devil. He wants to isolate us so that it's just us. And we're lay people. We're not monastics. We're not contemplatives in a monastery. That's their calling, And I guarantee you, Catholics won't even go there in their reflection of like, oh, God's calling me to be a contemplative monk, and that's where all the power is anyway, and we'll just pray. It's like, that's just not where they're probably going to go. So how do we evangelize when it's a double standard? Nobody can go out and do anything in most of the places of the country. But if you want to protest and have a Marxist revolution, you do whatever you want. You break every single rule. So the house is tripled against you. How do we evangelize in the midst of that? Because I didn't see Christ having to deal with that, with, this kind of a way. I mean, unless I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know Roman history pretty well, and I mean, in its own way, it was just as brutal and I mean, they shut down any insurrection or any, uprising or any movement. I mean, that's why it got him killed ultimately. So I think that, let's just, you brought up rules, and I think that what we have to frame this by saying we have to be committed to fulfilling the law of God, right? Mm-hmm. And to some extent, we are obligated to obey our higher authorities. We're told that, in Scripture, that's a witness. Mm-hmm. But we also are not obligated. We're not commanded to do something that's contrary to the law, to God's law. We can never submit ourselves. That's not a legitimate law. So if someone ever commands us to do something that's contrary to God's law, so we're in this weird space where it's like, yeah, I think that we need to find ways to go to Mass, and we need to, it's hard because I know a lot of people, Peter, who really believe that human life is on the line in terms of COVID-19 and needing to wear masks and social distance and do all this stuff. But, and I think in the beginning of this whole crisis, I don't think anybody really knew what we were up against. I think it became political somewhere along the line. And, after 6 or 8 weeks, I think everybody was a lot of people were like, I don't know. It seems like an overreaction. Not really sure, whether this is really, representative of the best data and the best science, which keeps changing every single week in terms of what we're supposed to believe about this virus and what the best response is. It's very tough. So, I think as a church, again, I think we have to, our intention has to be, how are we going to come together within reasonable limits and our obligations to respect higher authority, civil authority. Paul tells us that, St. Peter tells us that in his letter, but in a way that is going to give glory to God and honor God. And that means that we are going to just find creative ways to be with each other, to be with the Lord, to celebrate the Holy Mass. I mean, I in our diocese, I don't know how it is out there, but around our area, I've seen all sorts of really creative responses of helping people find ways to do adoration, to receive Holy Communion, and to even celebrate the Mass together. It's been far less than ideal, but what I've been impressed by is the tenacity with which people around here anyway have said, we're going to make this work in some way. What's been hard for me is so many people just dropped out when there were these opportunities. So like we could go to St. Malachi's and go to Eucharistic adoration. It's whole front of the church is glass. They put the tabernacle right out there. You could come and park. Priests would come out and give you Holy Communion when you did adoration, and that was just one example. I mean, there were so I was emboldened by that. It's like, I like seeing this kind of effort, this kind of energy, this kind of thinking out of the box. Like, no one's going to really stop us. I don't care what the rules say. We'll find a way. And, but, I wish it was more than 1% of the 20% of the people that normally come to Mass that were actually rallying to that. So the big $1 million question I'm asking is, why isn't everybody that was going to Sunday Mass showing as much tenacity and as much commitment to try to fight it, or to be with each other, to pray the rosary together and do things like that? And that's the $1 million question. How are we going to motivate our own people to really be on fire for their faith? How are we going to inspire them to see the value, the good, the gracious gift that God has put before us in the church, all the gifts that we have, and really embrace those and then in the world? And so I don't want to focus too much on the state and what the state's trying to do. That's focusing on what the devil's doing instead of focusing on what Jesus is trying to get us to do within these present circumstances, and say, look, the Lord is the Lord of all. He can make anything happen. But he's got to hear a roar from earth of prayers and appeals, and he has to see earnest efforts on the part of way more of our people to say, Lord, we're clamoring for you. And I hate to say it, but I don't think he's seeing that. He's seeing people saying, well, geez, I guess if Bishop's not going to mandate us to go to church and I don't have to go to church anymore, I guess going to church isn't important, and so maybe I just don't need to go anymore. I mean, right now I know, Father Jay is scratching his head right now trying to figure out how to deal with that problem. Talks to me about it almost every week. And I'm like, that's the nut to crack, Father. We got to figure out how to evangelize these people and help them desire to be, fully engaged in their faith and want to be holy men and women, saints who want to go out and change the world, So anyhow, maybe that's not the answer you were looking for in the question you posed, but that's where my heart is, honestly, right now. That's what I'm wrestling with. Preambula Group, that's what I'm trying to help Father Jay and our grouping solve that problem. That's one of the main things that I'm focused on right now is what can we do to reignite get these fires lit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like you to comment in a second on the Preambula Group. A thought that came to me as you were talking was what then Cardinal Ratzinger had said, and you would know, I forget the exact work, but it goes back, I think it was the 1970s. He wrote about what the church would look like in the future, and how a lot of people think, the new springtime is going to have a lot, the church is going to be exploding at the seams. And he said the complete opposite. He saw a church being whittled down to literally, like a remnant. We hear that word a lot, but it's really kind of what it is, down to the remnant where the salt is, but being so full of the Spirit that in the midst of kind of the sifting of the lapse or whatever you want to call it, Catholics or the apathetic ones, and that actually will serve the church in these times, because people will then know what the church really is, because that church will rise up, kind of like like a new Pentecost. Really, it only took 12, and Peter goes out in one person. Then there's 3,000, and then it starts multiplying. So, it's a paradoxical moment, because I think there's part of it. Resigning in a positive way of that's what we're seeing. And, we need to be strong. Our families, most importantly, have to be strong, and allow the Holy Spirit to be allow that fire to catch, because it's very, as it's very hard to, like you were saying before, people out there, they don't care about doctrine. It's an irrational world. But I do like one thing that Fulton Sheen said, and as St. John Paul II did. And he said that the future of the new evangelization was not going to be about that at all, actually. They said it was going to be reaching a culture where they're wounded. He says, once you can get to their wounds, sort of like what Fulton Sheen said, he would say, when people clamor about the church, I hate the church, I this, and this, confession's stupid, all this other stuff. He says, never pay attention to what they say. Why do they say it? And he used the case of a woman who had an abortion. He was instructing into the faith, and she heard his talk on confession, and she freaked out. She said, "I'm done. I'm never going back. I'm done." And he said, "Listen to one more thing, and then we'll see." And then she freaked out again, and he just said, "Look, your reaction is in no proportion to what you've heard from me teaching you of what the church believes." He says, "Have you had an abortion?" And she stopped, and she sighed, and she said, "Yes." He's like, that was it. And when the Christ's redemption can reach them in that moment, he said, once they're healed and they begin that, he says, then they get open to everything else. But if we go the other way, it doesn't work in this world. And that's the hardest thing, because especially as men too, you see these things and you have like a righteous anger. Like, if I see somebody like a woman's face or somebody, it's like, I want to pound that person. And in many ways, that's a natural good feeling to have. But is that the way to do it?
No, yeah. I mean, that's you put your finger like right on it. Like Jesus's way was not rage. He did as he came and he proclaimed it. He came and predominantly defined around his acts of mercy. And what was beautiful about the way he testified right to the Father is precisely as he went into those wounded places, especially people that were marginally on the margins in terms of shame and in terms of being scapegoated upon. So you have your lepers and you have your prostitutes, people like that. People who probably at the end of the day didn't deserve what was happening to them because society was laying its guilt upon those people. But Jesus went to those people and he entered into the messiness of their lives. And that's what he redeemed. That's what he healed. So as an example to us, it's like we as people of faith, those of us that are that remnant, we can't sit and take our stand over and against the world. And again, take up the weapons of the enemy and think we're going to beat them back by being outraged and protesting and shaking our fist. It's like, yeah, we're just gonna run over that way, right? But if we have the courage to go into and insinuate ourselves into the messiness and the woundedness of people's lives and to love them in those places, because that's the place that people will not go. People don't go there. It's too hard. But Christians have the power of love in our hearts to do that. And we can bind those wounds. That's how Jesus and the apostles in the early centuries of the church won so many followers. Jesus said, they will know you're Christians. They will know that you were sent by me, by the Father, because of your love for each other, period. And I think sometimes we think, yeah, I want to lean into my righteous anger. It's like, it's not that Jesus didn't have righteous anger. He had the moment in the temple, but that's a very unique situation. By and large, Isaiah 52 and 53, that's the model it gives us. Like a lamb led into the slaughter, he opened not his mouth. He bore the sins of the world upon himself by precisely placing himself within the context of the misery of the fallen human condition and redeeming us from the inside out. That's the model it gives us. There are so many opportunities every single day for Christian people to reach into the suffering of people around them and to simply give them hope. Let them know that there is someone that cares about them. But we're often quiet, unresponsive. We see it around us and we don't step out there and pray with people, pray over people, meet people's basic human needs. So to me, that's the revolution. No socialist or progressive is ever going to be able to do that. It's not their DNA. It's not in their vision of reality. They're just not going to do that. They'll talk about it and clamor about it, but they'll never do it. Christians need to do it. And that's the real revolution. That's the real, transformation that the gospel can bring. And so, we have to first and foremost do that for our own people that are lost and broken so that we can increase our numbers and become more than a remnant, right? So I think that's, and we begin in our own families. I know, how dedicated you've been to your family ministry and healing families and helping families to be reconciled and to be redeemed and transformed in Christ and to become little cells and little beacons, of light and hope for the world. It's one of the most important important things that we can do is to be bonded together in Christian love, and then go out and take care of our neighbors and reach out and share Christ with other people. We can't lose if we do that. We might suffer some martyrdom. Most of us won't be martyred. Most of us will just win our neighbor over to the love of God, and that's what we need to do.
Well, thanks, Mike, for those. It's almost like closing comments there as we get to the end of our time here anyway. Before we do go, why don't you tell them what you had mentioned a little bit earlier about this is how the Preambula Group is responding and what their efforts are trying to do. If you could kind of summarize what is the Preambula Group, what is Preambula, what is that, what it is that you're focused on in light of providing these kinds of solutions.
Yeah, so preambula comes from the Latin phrase preambula fidei, which means preambles of faith, or I like to translate it as faith. God has planted the seeds of everlasting life in every human soul, but those seeds need to be cultivated. We need to till the ground and help people become more receptive to the message of Christ. And most Catholics don't feel comfortable or confident being that for another person outside the church, going out into the world and doing that, being that for the people. So, and I believe that the key to the fruits that we come forth in our lives as disciples out in the world really happens through the cultivation of these lives. So we have created a whole bunch of formation programs, a number of formation programs that, Catholics to really just grow in their spiritual life, in the discernment of their unique gifting, and to walk with people as they begin to discern where God's calling them to serve and help build the kingdom of God out in the world. And being with people, informing them as they go through that journey of discovering, like God has called me into the mission field, but I have no idea what my contribution can be. So everybody has gifts. We're all part of the body of Christ, but we need to cultivate those gifts. So Preambula Group is just trying to get those seeds of, the kingdom to journey people and Catholics and provide the formation and the tools they need to feel comfortable, confident to go out into the world. We also have another initiative that we're going to be doing a lot of evangelization work out in digital, social media platforms under the title of More Than You Realize, MTYR. We'll be rolling that out in the fall, but we've already opened up a couple of formation opportunities. One is called Discipleship Forum. If you've gone through Alpha Catholic or Christ Life program or something like that, it's a great next step for you. If the next program after that is called On Fire, which is just a real deep dive into the interior life of prayer, discernment, discovery of one's gifting. And then a third stage is called Missionary Catholic, and we just want to really help deploy, the people of God into the world to take their gifts and strengths and to advance and further the mission of Christ in the world. Instead of expecting everybody to come to us, it's time for us to go out to them. We have to go out. So that's Preambula in a nutshell. You can find us on the web at preambula.org, and it's Preambula. So Preambula.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Mike. I have it on the screen here. They can see your book, the Preambula Group, and website right there. I want to encourage everyone to go check it out. It's a well-done website. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can also find Dr. Therrien's book, The Catholic Faith Explained, on that site. I don't know if there's a way. Maybe he'll give you a signed copy or something. I don't know if they do that, but anyway. Now, I think you'll be really inspired, once again, right? Because we're talking about, these are, like he said, the seeds of the faith. We're talking about the nuts and bolts that we need. So in one sense, it's great because the answers are simple. They're more simple than we think. And when we do that, it's sort of like the recent gospel of where Jesus says, I thank you, Father, for, that you have not revealed certain things to the wise and to the learned, but to children. And when we become like that, we dispose ourselves, to be more, you can say, open to love, to have that kind of innocence that, how can that not affect a culture? Than to see that, which is why the devil, of course, wants to destroy it. But that's also where the power is. It's like what Dr. Therrien earlier saying, David and Goliath. He had the strength. He wasn't just a little weasel. I mean, the fact that he stepped out And he says, this very day, though, you're going to drop dead. I mean, he had confidence. So he wasn't just like, I hope this works out. He was fortified. And so anyway, I want you to check out the Preambula Group, preambula.org, and just follow what's going on with whatever they've got going, their social media things. I don't know what your addresses are, if there's hashtag Preambula.
We're getting there. I mean, we're building it,
okay,
as we go. So
sure,
we got stuff there, but got more. You can just stay tuned. More. So
awesome. Well, I want to thank you for being here. Before everyone goes, I want to do a couple of things. One, if you haven't already, please subscribe to. Here we go. Subscribe to this station as we go on YouTube. I really pray we could keep having awesome interviews like this. How can we understand? How we respond? How can we? I mean, we are called in this moment of time. We were created for this moment. And if you feel insignificant, this is the time. And more than anything, I encourage you, go to prayer and be confident before God, knowing that He chose you in this moment of world history and church history. And if you don't do it, nobody else will. So that's a great calling that you have. So, and we've got great results. Please subscribe to this, to the station YouTube channel. And then also I encourage you, please, to like it. That makes me happy. And of course, just spread it through your own social networks. And check out the Fulton Sheen Institute fultonsheen.institute. Where you're going to find also other ways that we are proposing that we can work within our parishes virtually through things like this online that will help really, I think, not just wake up people, but starting helping people to be bonded of like mind around the world. Looking at the feed that I had tonight, New Zealand, Venezuela, Ecuador, Canada, US. I mean, that's just crazy when you think about it. I don't know how exactly you found these things, but I can tell you the Holy Spirit was involved. And that's what I see happening. So don't be afraid to, if God puts something on your heart, well, just start to do it. Allow the Holy Spirit to take you whatever, your 2 loaves and 5 fishes, or what is it? No, 2 fishes. I don't know. What is it? 2 fishes and 5 loaves. You know what it is. Yeah. Whatever little you have, and allow the Lord to do great things. And He will. That's how this entire initiative of the Preambula Group started, how the Fulton Sheen Institute has started, and just spread the word. And so another thing I want to just put out there before I forget is a week, not even a week, on Monday, July 13th, we have our ongoing series on Fatima Now, where it's going to be July. So we're going to focus on the significance of that July 13th message, where the famous secret of Fatima was given. And we're going to look at the importance of that, how to best understand what that is, and more importantly, how to implement what Our Lady revealed to the world through the children for us, because there was a really special positive message in July 13th, but a very serious one. So I want to encourage you to go to the fultonsheen.institute, and you can just RSVP. You'll get the link to it. If you subscribe, you'll automatically get it. But it's been an exciting series. The feedback has been awesome. And one last thing is, in light of families and the things that we could be doing, is praying the rosary. I always go back to that. We mentioned St. Dominic. With St. Dominic, when all of his learned preaching failed, Our Lady simply said, preach the rosary. Preach the rosary. And so that's what he did. So and the conversions started right away. And so that's why one of the big emphasis that we do, and it's a great way to support what we do at the Fulton Sheen Institute, is through the Aroma Rosary that my wife, really, she's responsible for this, through the Aroma Rosary partnership that we have, that brings the highest beautiful quality rosaries into your home. These are things that you could pass on from, to your children, to your children's children, to your friends. They're specially made so they could also absorb essential oils. And so it adds another, you could say, level of the senses to our prayers, so that we're praying with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, all of our strength, and everything. And so I encourage you to check that out. Just go to aromarosary.com And every time you bring this beautiful rosary into your home, you are supporting what we do. And there's no way that we can grow the things that we're trying to do without that support. So please check out aromarosary.com, what we offer in the Fulton Sheen Institute, fultonsheen.institute. I have my own book, if you want to really learn the mystery of Mary in a whole new way, at a time where Mary is, you could say, at the forefront of everything that's going on and preparing for the new era to come. This book is going to give you a whole new, I think, understanding of an insight into the mystery of Mary that I think is going to have great repercussions in your own spiritual life. And if you know non-Catholics, I think it's a great work to give them because it's very biblically based. So just want to thank you for joining us. Thank you once again, Dr. Therrien. And God, I hope we can have you on sometime in the near future. But more than anything, know that you have our prayers. And I wish the best for Lynn and the family.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's great to be with you. Great to see you. See a little bit of your place.
Yeah, here we are, just a little bit. You know,
I'm going to be hopefully visiting one of these days soon out that way. So go out to Spokane and see my sister. I won't be too far away. But yeah, no, it's great. Thanks, and I'll be praying for you too. And it's exciting what you're doing. You're living your dream. We've had so many conversations about this dream of yours. So
yeah, it's a
awesome.
dream. Yeah, it is. It is. So just pursue what the Lord wants, and it might not be easy. We've had our nightmare moments, but it's
not starting a new thing is tough. I've discovered that last year.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
okay.
But that's great. Well, God bless you.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
All right. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.